This episode is brought to you by the Command Presence Leadership Institute. Find out more by visiting commandpresence.net.
Welcome to the Faces of Leadership with Michael Warren. Be the leader you wish that you had.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Faces of Leadership podcast, where we believe that leadership is about two things. It's about people, and it's about actions. We talk with leaders from across society who are stepping up to do what they can, where they are, with what they have. The question is, what can we learn from them? What can we learn from each other as we strive to be the leader that we wish we had? Hello, everybody. My name is Michael Warren, and I'm your host. Thank you for being with us today. And folks, listen, I say this often, but it bears repeating because, it's true. One of the best things about my job is being able to meet some incredible people. And as we're recording this episode, I just returned from the Texas Commission on Law Enforcement Conference in McAllen, Texas. What a fantastic group of people. I had an absolute blast, and I wanted to make sure that I told the folks from Texas, thank you so much for your hospitality. But now on to today's guest. So our guest today has served in law enforcement for over 26 years. He is a dynamic leader and a change agent, which, folks, that's one of the hardest jobs to undertake if you're a leader, just throwing it out there. He was hired as an outside chief in 2019 to lead the Moline Police Department, which had struggled in recent years. He changed the culture, modernized the police department, and improved community relations, all necessary in order to be an effective police organization, I should add. During his tenure, the department has achieved IACP Tier 1 and 2 accreditation. He is the vice president at large for the Illinois Association of Chiefs of Police. He serves as the Illinois representative to the IACP State Association of Chiefs of Police and is a member of the IACP Community Policing Committee. Our guest is a graduate of the FBI National Academy, Class 269, go 269, a certified police chief through the Illinois Association of Chiefs of Police, a certified diversity, equity, and inclusion through the Northwestern University. He has a Master of Organizational Leadership degree and a Bachelor of Arts in Business Administration. Everybody, welcome to the podcast, Chief Darren Gault. Welcome to the podcast, sir.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
Man, I tell you what, that's a mouthful right there.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess to start things off, because based upon what you are brought in to do as the leader at your agency, I want to go a little bit back further. And so can you kind of tell me where this leadership journey began for you? Because it's amazing to me the different pathways that people take to get into this leadership thing, as we like to call it. So what was it with you?
Well, professionally, I really had not planned on a leadership position. Back in about 2003, I was on a FBI gang task force, which is made up of a bunch of different officers from different agencies and supervised by the FBI. And I'd been there for a couple of years, and I was appointed a team leader. And it was kind of an interesting dynamic because you really don't have any positional authority as a team leader, right? Although I supervised the group of officers, I wasn't from their agency. So you really had to lead in a different way. And I didn't know really much about leadership at the time, like academic-based leadership. And so I didn't really know how I was leading, but I was really leading because people respected me, people trusted me, people believed I was an expert. I knew kind of what I was doing. And that really kind of kicked off my leadership style. And it also kind of kicked off my leadership journey. And then a couple of years later, I enrolled in the Master of Organizational Leadership program at St. Ambrose University. And everything just kind of took off from there.
I don't know how it was for you, but I remember when I first started doing formal study in leadership, I was kind of like, people have been studying this stuff for a while. It would have been a heck of a lot easier if I'd have known some of this stuff. But when you were talking about your role there with the task force, I think that leaders are often born because and I'm not talking about born at birth. I'm talking about born in the time. They're born because they're technically and tactically proficient. But those two don't matter if they aren't good people.
Well, yeah, I think what I tell people a lot of times when I'm trying to develop leaders, or maybe I do these talks or something, is really the best tool that you have is a social capital bank account. And over your career, you're building relationships with people. And some of those are based on your position. Some of those are based on because they like to follow you, or you have charisma, or you have traits. But then people start looking to you because you're a trusted person in whatever role you're taking, and you're just adding to your bank account in social capital, the relationships that you've built. And it takes a long time to build a social capital bank account, but it takes very little time to burn through it. And so you have to be very careful spending social capital as a leader, but you need to work for a long time from day one in your career or your journey in whatever profession you are in building that social capital account.
I appreciate what you said there, because these leadership principles that we talk about, they're not jurisdictionally boundaried into law enforcement. They go across all walks. And you talked about the social capital, but I want to bring that into the policing profession just a second, because you're on the community policing committee. So you have to build capital not only as an individual in order to be effective, but organizations also have to build capital with their customer base, with the people they serve, whether you're a for-profit, a nonprofit, or in this case, a government agency. Would you agree with that?
Oh, yeah, 100%. I think that what we try to do here at the Moline Police Department is we try to build a culture. And this is going to sound strange from a community policing standpoint, but when I got here to the Moline Police Department, I eliminated the community policing unit. I did that because I wanted it to be a culture throughout the entire department, rather than somebody writing a report that said, turned over to the COP unit and have somebody follow up on it or try to solve this problem. And it's really, spread that message. It has created people at the grassroots level, in the door, young officers, older officers, trying to come up with ways to solve problems or engage the community. But then that builds the trust and collaboration with the community as an organization. But there are so many moving parts to leadership. And I know that you mentioned it in your opener, that it's action oriented, right? And that leadership is an activity. It is not a position. It's an activity. And what I try to do is I try to build those actions throughout the entire organization, not just in an office, not just in my office, not just in, a specialty unit office. But, we believe that leaders can be anywhere in the organization.
The best organizations, my experience has been, they have them all over the organization. But I love what you said about the community policing unit, because in order for it to be truly effective, it has to be organization wide. When I first graduated from college, I worked at Walmart, and we weren't a 24-hour one, but we had a midnight crew that did stocking. It was our store manager just hammered home that they are just as responsible for customer service as somebody who's working a cash register, because one of the best customer services we can provide are shelves that are full of the product that the person is looking for when they come to the store. But it kind of requires a change in perspective, because people think that community policing are the soft cops, for lack of a better term, that they're the ones that are the out there hugging and singing and doing all that kind of crazy stuff. But it really isn't. It's about that social capital that you talked about earlier.
Well, community policing is relationships, right? It's building relationships with people. It's having conversations, communications, two-way feedback. And that's hard to do if you don't have relationships, or you're not building that social capital. And I think it's really hard to do if it's isolated into a small area of your organization. We try to promote it throughout our whole police department, our whole organization. And, I think if you follow the Moline Police Department on social media, we have over, I think, around 50,000 followers, 50,000 followers for an agency our size, 84 officers and about a 43,000 population. We're pretty happy with the engagement we have with the community in all aspects of policing.
Well, Chief, one of the things that I teach in the classes that I'm involved in is that, and I get to teach at a lot of chiefs conventions and conferences and stuff like that. One of the things I tell them is, say, listen, if you have an issue with the way that your people are handling the public, then the first place you ought to look is the manner in which you're handling your people internally. Community policing is about relationships, then being able to be a community police officer is about having relationships with my leadership folks inside. So I love what you said, because I do think relationships are key, but we're going to reflect what happens internally, externally. So as a formal leader, you have to ensure that you're building those strong relationships within your organization as well, don't you?
Well, right now, community trust is a big buzzword, I think. It's just because, we know what we know in the current time, right? But if you know anything about policing, that has been a term that's been going on since 1872 with Robert Peel's principles of policing when they modernized law enforcement. And so, we've been trying to solve this, or this has been, I guess, in essence, a buzzword about trust. But a lot of the stuff that you'll read about trust building is externally focused, is building trust with the community. And I think that you hit the nail on the head, so to speak, is if you're struggling with building that trust externally, there's probably a problem internally with your organization. And, trust is very fragile, certainly in the public, but it is also very fragile internally. And I would just go back to, those comments about social capital. Effective leaders build social capital by building relationships. And if you don't have a good relationship with your organization internally, and your other leaders inside, informal and formal leaders, are not building a healthy organization, then your external service is going to also be problematic, and you're going to have a hard time there as well.
Yesterday, I was speaking down in Texas, and I say this in a lot of the classes, that I think the most valuable thing that law enforcement has lost over about the past 10, 11, 12 years is the benefit of the doubt. There's a benefit of the doubt from the public, and we lose that when that social capital bank that you talked about, when it runs dry. And then it's almost like borrowing from a loan shark. You can't catch up because the interest payments are so high. And it often requires radical change. It's always required that you be intentional, but man, the effort that's required to rebuild it when that account runs dry, it can be overwhelming.
I agree with you, but I would add, I feel like somewhere along the line, our bank account was robbed. So when you talk about, we've lost the benefit of the doubt, someone stole that from our account. And I don't want to overly criticize previous leaders, but somewhere along the line, and I don't have this research or I could pinpoint it, but we allowed that account to be robbed. And I do think that for a large period of law enforcement, they were a no comment or a less than transparent organization or profession. They hid behind, we don't want to give away our tactics or our techniques. And we lost the public's, we let either the media or other forces rob that capital away from us. And we just kind of stood by and watched the thieves rob the bank. And now we're paying the price for it. And I'm big on educating the public. We have a very good program in Illinois that the Illinois Association of Chiefs of Police built with the NAACP about the 10 shared principles. And one of those principles is that we both have a duty to inform the public about interactions with law enforcement. So, some of the things that I do with either the community, even my elected officials, is we try to connect the dots on the why behind the what. Why do we need that equipment? Why do we do certain things? I lean on IACP or Lexipol or other different best practices for policies, and we don't just make things up. And so there's again, I think that's part of the social capital and building the trust. You have to do that internally too, right? You've got to explain to the current generation of employees that we have more than you did. If you understand anything about generations and generational leadership, we cannot lead our folks that in the current generation of the workforce that we have, Gen Z and millennials, like we did, or like our leaders before us led traditionalists or baby boomers. They just are different people. And I think for the most part, law enforcement leaders haven't educated themselves on leadership principles. and they also don't understand the workforce. And so there's this gap, which is causing us some problem. And then meanwhile, some of these external forces, like you mentioned, are in the cookie jar, are stealing our bank account.
One of my favorite leadership books is Call Sign Chaos by General James Mattis. And in there, he talks about how if the leaders in an organization, if they find out that false information is getting out about their organization, they have a proactive responsibility to address it, even if they know they're going to lose. Because if you don't address it externally, then people begin to accept it as true internally. And I love what you said right there, because we can't hide behind the no comment. We can't hide. There's very, very little that we do that's so secret squirrel that we can't at least talk about it in generalities. Especially, I mean, man, I remember back when 24-hour news started becoming a big deal. And it was right around the first Gulf War where you started having this 24-hour news cycle. And well, that cycle has to be fed. So a police executive refusing to talk about something doesn't mean that the media is not going to run something. You just have no input on what they run.
Yeah, if you don't participate in the message, someone else will craft it for you.
And that's dangerous, man. That's how,
very dangerous.
That's how the bank account gets robbed, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
For our listeners, just to give them an idea of how we came to be connected, we were connected on LinkedIn, and I actually saw a post that you had written. I'm like, man, I like how this guy thinks, because the measure of somebody's intelligence is how much they agree with you. And based upon what you wrote, you're a pretty intelligent guy. But the post was on toxic leadership, man. And I could feel the passion that you have about that in the words that you wrote and the way that you wrote them. So I'm just going to throw it out there. And I would love to hear from you. Why is that such an important topic for you?
Yeah, it was kind of funny. Like it went, I guess I'd say mini viral for me, based on my audience, particularly in law enforcement. The audience that I have is largely a law enforcement connection on LinkedIn. And it kind of took off, and it just kept getting shared and shared. I am passionate about it because I enjoy leadership. I feel like we've built something really good here, and I've had a lot of success largely because of the people that have jumped on board with some of the philosophy, and I think we built a healthy organization here. But when I kind of look around, everybody's seeing news cycles, everybody's seeing, a police chief in trouble or an agency in trouble, a police chief getting put on administrative leave or different things like that. And I feel like law enforcement in general is stuck in some antiquated leadership styles and really has not kept up with modern leadership with the modern employee. Traditionally, law enforcement leadership has been overly focused on military leadership. And while I love my colleagues in the military, some of those things don't often translate to modern law enforcement, particularly like the warrior ethos, where it's, mission first, never quit, discipline, resilience, esprit de corps. That's okay. The world today, military and law enforcement are continuing to shift further and further apart, particularly in the situation that we're in with mental health or different things that we have to approach some of these issues a little differently. And I think part of that problem then is leaders are not educated in leadership and they don't know how to adapt. And then consequently, they can't apply adaptive change. Like you mentioned, it's an action. And so now we can't get anywhere because we're stuck in authoritarian leadership styles. And I'm not saying that authoritarian leaders can't change. I'm just saying if they're applying authoritarian leadership styles, again, we're stuck in traditionalists and baby boomers, which they took that, right? They were very loyal. They were very obedient. And that was a leadership style that may have worked then. But treating subordinates as disposable tools and having highly irritable, manipulative leaders that are self-centered and have a lack of empathy, have a lot of aggression, is really a dead leadership style in modern law enforcement. And I think those of us that, maybe are in the leadership space that maybe have a little bit more education, really need to get that message out and say, time to look within and have some self-awareness and see if we can move forward. And I think that will also improve police community relations in modern times.
It's interesting you brought up the military side, because if we're honest with each other, the military mission is becoming to resemble more of the police mission than the police is the military mission. And the military is coming to law enforcement to learn how to work with the community rather than occupy or own the community. And it's always better when it's a with instead of, I think the best model is policing with the community instead of policing the community.
Shouldn't be that hard. Peel told us about this in 1800s, right? The late 1800s, it's laid out and we still can't quite perfect it.
Well, it's interesting to me how there will be some who will reference Sir Robert Peel, and yet you go and you look at, and you see the same authoritarian type of management externally that you see internal to the organization.
Yeah, and again, you go back to those as the public is the police and the police are the public. I often am giving talks and reminding people in the public, we are your neighbors, your soccer coaches, your Boy Scout troop leaders, your committee members, your fellow person in a grocery aisle. The difference between a police officer and somebody who's not a police officer is that we chose this as our profession and someone else chose to be a teacher or a banker or a lawyer. And we're all participating in this social construct where we interact with each other. It's just our profession. And somehow we've lost the human element to that. And people forget that the police are the public and the public are the police. And we're really not much different than the teacher or the banker or whoever down the street. We're your friends, your neighbors, your family members. We put this uniform on for a calling, and this is what we do. And again, like you mentioned, we're with, not against. It's not an us versus them mentality, or it shouldn't be. And if communities are still participating in that, they're going to lose their community pretty quickly.
You talked about the choice of profession. Doesn't make us better. It just makes us more accountable. And it makes us more accountable to the people, or should make us more accountable to the people that didn't choose this as their profession.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that, today's day and age of technology is the technology curve is really steep. Police officers, police agencies are struggling with it to try to find the technology to continue to provide transparency and accountability, like body cams or drones or whatever, and the public is demanding that. But in some sense, they're kind of demanding it a little bit faster than we can keep up. And, I think you mentioned it earlier. It's just that balance that we're trying to find. And, again, back to the leadership topic is that I feel like, law enforcement leaders are still stuck in this positional authority is that, well, I'm a lieutenant or I'm a division commander or I'm a deputy chief or I'm the chief. And so therefore I'm a leader. Yes, you have positional authority, but have you developed the other sources of power? Do people see you as an expert? Do they see that you know what you're doing, right? That you're educated, that you're perfecting your profession? Have you built relationships? Do you have what we call referent power? Do people believe in you? And when I hire a new police officer, I bring them into my office and I sit them down and I explain to them what professionalism means. We have 3 core values at the Moline Police Department: professionalism, teamwork, and integrity. And particularly with professionalism, I tell them that law enforcement is a craft, and it's your responsibility through your entire career, including me in my career, is to continue to perfect your craft and get better all the time. And if you're a leader and you've just assumed that position of authority because you rose through the ranks and it was your time, and you're not continuing to perfect your craft, you are practicing failed leadership.
Couldn't agree with you more, because if you have to resort to, I order you to do something, to me, that's the leadership version of use of force. Sometimes it's necessary and sometimes it's appropriate, but that can't be your only go-to tool that you have. When you get to that point right there, you're no longer leading somebody, you're managing them. And that's not sustainable long-term.
Yeah. So there's a leadership theory from the 50s that French and Raven produced and studied, and they have the sources of power. And, when you order somebody using positional authority and you're using like coercive power, for example, you're going to get compliance, right? People have to do what you are telling them to do because you have coercive or reward power that is given to you based on your position of authority. But that as a law enforcement leader, I'm not trying to just get compliance. I'm trying to get commitment. And I'm trying to get them to commit to organizational goals, our culture, our philosophy. And there are better sources of power to use, like referent power and expert power, where you will get that commitment produces greater results than compliance.
If you have an organization, no matter what the organization is, no matter what their product is, that is filled with people who are committed, then you've got an organization of organizational cheerleaders. Those organizations oftentimes are fully staffed and they have higher productivity and they have less sick time. And there's a whole bunch of things that come along with it. Quite honestly, the biggest cheerleaders of any organization should be the people who work there. If you've got groupies that are outside the organization that are bigger fans of an organization than your own people are, I think I'm not saying that you're doing something wrong, but it's something that needs to be examined. Why do external folks like us so much, but maybe internally we aren't liked as well?
Yeah, you want your people at all levels of your organization to be trying to achieve the organizational mission, the organizational philosophy when you're not there, right? So obviously I have deputy chiefs, for example, and I try not to micromanage staff. I want them to understand the why behind the what. I try to connect the dots with them. And then I ask them to do that with their division commanders and down to their sergeants, down to the officers on the front lines. And when they understand, then they can execute and get us where we're trying to go together rather than me ordering them to do it. And to me, then you're operating on all cylinders at that point, and the organization is much healthier internally and externally.
If the leaders connected the dot and they've given, as you put it, the why behind the what, it allows the people that are on the front lines to act adaptively, to be able to be agile, to address new unforeseen circumstances that have come up, but they understand because they've been, some would call it indoctrinated. I just call it led appropriately, but because they understand what the mission is and they understand the why behind the what, they are more likely to do what the formal leader would want done in their absence.
You mentioned my post that I made on LinkedIn, and one of the things inside that post that I cited was a 2024 Deloitte survey of Gen Z and millennial workers. And I think what's interesting, if like you really study your workforce, right? Most of the people that are working for us now are Gen Z or millennials, and you understand them, or you try to understand their generation, right? At least looking in generalities. That study said that the majority of Gen Zs, 86%, and the majority of millennials, 89%, say having a sense of purpose is important to their overall job satisfaction and well-being. That should not be a difficult thing for us to accomplish in law enforcement, right? We have a noble profession that is providing wonderful service to our community, or should be. If anything, your job has purpose in law enforcement, helping people, solving problems, bringing, justice, being a voice for the voiceless, all sorts of things. That message should be an easy thing for us to get across to Gen Z and millennials. And instead, like you mentioned, people have some myths about that workforce, but it's because they don't understand what they grew up in, how their values were shaped. If you look back at generations, right, the people born in the 20s to 40s grew up in the Great Depression, World War II, radio, bad job economy, baby boomers, Vietnam, civil rights movement. When you start to get into millennials post 9/11 and post 9/11, Columbine, technology, in-depth communication, right? You have to understand who they are and how they think. And it's your responsibility as a leader to understand that so that you can connect with your employees. And I don't want to say get the most out of them, but help the organization function at its highest level and the most effectively.
But I think a leader that does what you're talking about right there, they do get the most out of their people, but that's not what they're achieving. What they're wanting is for their people to get the most out of their job from an individual perspective. And we get the most out of our job if it is purposeful, if we are motivated because we understand the why. So we don't do it for selfish reasons, but we do benefit from it selfishly if we do it correctly.
Well, we don't produce widgets, right? In law enforcement, we don't produce widgets, meaning that our company doesn't build a product, put it out for sale, sell it. And if we need more money, we produce more widgets or we cut costs or, to make the widget cheaper, but we charge more, right? We don't produce widgets. We provide a service. And so in order to perfect the service that we provide, you've got to start internally with the employees that are providing the service. And some of that starts with you as at the top. If if you're a police chief listening to this podcast, just take a step back and, think about how you're leading and how you're connecting with your employees. We did a lot of work early on when I started the police department, and I was having a little bit of trouble getting project going or something. And I realized we really haven't explained it to them. And once we started communicating better and connecting with employees better, it wasn't until then where we really started to become more of an efficient organization, in my opinion.
So I love that. So based upon your experience, based upon your research, your education, your experience, what are some of the effects that toxic leadership has on the people within the organization? Because the effect that it has internally is probably going to be reflected externally. So what are some of the things that you've seen that have happened negatively in organizations that have toxic leader or toxic leaders?
Well, let's just start with the easy one is I think it hurts the credibility of our noble profession. And whether, you talked about internally and externally, I think they're one and the same with this, because toxic leadership is going to damage internally the organizational efficiency, the service. We're in a service industry, right? The service that we provide. And then that is going to easily translate to the external product or delivery. And whether it's making employees edgy, uncomfortable, miserable, they're going out in providing a service or having to deal with high stress incidents or stuff that is, draining. And then they are projecting a crabby, aggressive, uncomfortable, unhappy service delivery method, right? And so then it just becomes a bad cycle. And then ultimately it is creating a image problem for us in law enforcement that hurts the credibility of our profession.
I love what you said right there. It's not just the individual and it's not just the agency, it's the profession that's affected by this.
Right. And then if you look at it then from an internal standpoint, if I'll just reference that Deloitte survey again, there are no more blind loyalists in our workforce, whether it's law enforcement or anywhere, right? And so if you go back to your grandparents or your parents, right, they would kind of take a little bit of that bad leadership, the barking order, aggressive authoritarian style leadership, because they were so obedient and they were so loyal to the company, the organization. Those folks are pretty much gone from the workforce, and that mindset from the employee is gone. If you look at that survey, the answer will tell you how the employees will react to it. One half of Gen Z and millennials have quit a job or rejected an assignment because of an employer's values. People are not afraid to leave anymore. They're not going to put up with that. And I think that authoritarian leadership is dead. You will lose the employee. And I think early in this talk, you referenced management and leadership, and we can talk about that, but you will not be a leader for practicing old leadership styles. You're just going to be a manager, and you're going to see a revolving door of employees. Your organization will not be able to change. Your organization will not be able to modernize. You'll not be able to meet the workforce where they want to be. They want purpose-driven. They want to have a higher sense of purpose than the previous generation. You're not going to have a modern workforce if you don't make some changes.
I think it's ironic because when I listen to you explain what the current generations in the workforce are looking for, it sounds very honorable. Yet so many of the old style leaders, they see it as a threat. But I think those are all positive qualities that you were just talking about.
Yeah, it will help us meet the public where they want to be met, right? You've got to read the room, if you will, right? Is read the room of society. Listen, law enforcement is a profession and it changes over time. And I'll give a simple example. And I, in Illinois, we've gone through a lot of changes in criminal justice reform and stuff. And so 5 years ago, 6 years ago, compared to where we're at today, you would start to see some grumblings, right? And I tell new employees, like, you're not going to know the difference. If I would ask employees right now to go out and light the gas lamps at 10 o'clock at night in the town square, they would file a grievance. They're like, that's not our job. Well, but that's what law enforcement did in old times, right? The night watchman. And we've changed, right? And we've modernized, we've professionalized. We're the most educated workforce we've ever had. And so we have to adapt. And if society asks us to do something different, we have to look at how we can meet that challenge. And I think what you mentioned just a second ago was the new workers that we're getting in are willing to meet us there. And the question is, are the leaders willing to go there?
That's a great question. And so that brings up another interesting point to me. It's very easy for us most of the time to see the faults in others, to point out the toxic leadership traits that somebody else has. Perhaps the hardest one to see is when we're starting to slide that direction ourselves. What are some things that a leader can look for to let them know that, hey, you know what, maybe you're sliding down that pathway and becoming a toxic leader yourself?
You eloquently put it already, and I think the really scary and shocking part of this question is that some leaders do not have the emotional intelligence to identify those warning signs. So what does that mean? Well, good leaders have a heightened sense of self-awareness, right? They can kind of sense when what they said didn't resonate with someone or made somebody uncomfortable. They have the ability to self-regulate, right? Is that if it's gone bad, they can kind of resurrect the ship, so to speak. They have empathy for others. They have good social skills. And I think the sad and scary part about your question is that those people can't identify that. And, so for example, like a bully in the workforce, they don't get it. They do not even know that they're making other people uncomfortable. It's a personality problem where they're not able to recognize that they're making people uncomfortable, that they're being aggressive, that they have lack of empathy for others. They don't have any guilt, right? And so I guess what I would say is if you haven't read the book Emotional Intelligence as a leader, you should, and then step back and think about it and say, what can I do to be better at self-awareness? Because, what you asked is, how will a leader identify? Well, that's the first question is, can you identify? Are you self-aware? And that's the first skill you need to build.
that kind of leads us into this next thing here, because I just finished an episode of one of my favorite podcasts, the Human Behavior Podcast, with Greg Williams and Brian Mayer, and I've gone back. They've been on for several years, and I've been going back and listening to some of their old stuff. The episode I just finished was based off of a book called Warnings Unheeded, and it actually talked about toxic, dangerous leader, formal leader in the Air Force, who ended up ultimately causing the death of his flight crew because he continued to do things that he shouldn't do. And so I guess what I'm trying to get at is here, what would you say to that person that they're working for a toxic leader? Because we don't get to choose our bosses most of the time right there. What can somebody who says, you know what, I believe that leader's toxic, but I need to stay here. And quite honestly, I'm the one that's keeping everybody else safe. I'm the one that's providing shelter for them. So what type of advice would you give to those folks that find themselves working for somebody that isn't that emotionally intelligent person?
Well, the first thing is the organization has got to have some structure to it and some safeguards so that there can be basically a safety net around maybe that employee or that shift or whatever, where somebody can intervene. You know, I've had issues where I didn't know, right, that was going on, and then something bubbles up. You've got to be able, as the leader, right, the CEO of is to take action and say that that's not tolerated here. You know, I think if you look back at that Deloitte survey, the employees are telling us what their coping mechanism is. They're going to quit. That is really prevalent in the current workforce, is that they will go somewhere else. And so, you know, if you're a leader and you're having troubles retaining employees, you better start looking at some of your subordinate leaders and say, you know, is there a problem? You know, why are people bailing off this shift all the time? Or, you know, what is going on? And then start working on that. You know, as for the employee that is maybe dealing with that, you know, I'm hopeful that your agency has some sort of officer wellness program that you can get into to you know, make sure that your mental health, your wellness is first and foremost, right? And I think that those people in those wellness or those coping strategies are different for every person, but you've got to be able to talk to somebody. You know, we have some pretty good wellness programs here at the police department. We're always looking for new ones or better ones. You've got to be able to have that in an organization so people have the ability to communicate with someone about coping with those. And then you've also got to have some strategies for them to communicate that there's a problem. And then you've got to be able to accept it, right, as a leader, and be like, we've got a problem here and we need to address it.
Most police organizations, and I think a lot of the private sector does as well, they have these early warning systems in place where this stuff will be entered, you know, based upon the number of use of forces or pursuits. I mean, a sick time, all those things right there that by themselves may not be concerning. But when you start seeing a group of them, then it doesn't mean something is wrong, but it gives a leader the opportunity to step in and try to intervene early in case there is something wrong.
Well, when I was a young leader, you know, first line supervisor, you know, I was a little high strung, you know, a lot of pressure, you know, trying to move ahead quickly and get the job done fast. If I had somebody that screwed up, I was like, what is wrong with them? You know, like, why are they doing this? You know, and I would be a little bit angry. Now, as a police chief, I have an employee screw up. Let's just say, for example, I had an officer fall asleep in a squad car and somebody took a picture of it. My first thought is, what's wrong with the officer, in a deeper sense of, is there something going on in their personal life? Why is this person not sleeping? Or they have health problems, or they have problems at home? And not being angry, but being like, hey, check in. What we'll deal with that issue, right? The violation of a policy or whatever. We'll deal with that. We have ways to deal with that. But let's figure out why it happened. What is going on? Is there a problem? And I think you could apply that philosophy to a variety of different things. It might not just be a personal problem. It might be a work problem. But let's figure it out. And I think you just have to have a mindset about employees first, and caring about the employees, because they're your number one payroll expenditure, and they should be your number one concern. If you have that mindset, I think you can find some strategies to get to the root of the problem.
I couldn't agree more, because they're also your number one responsibility. I think one of the things I wish that these early warning systems would look at is that if we start to see a commonality of people experiencing these things, if there's a commonality of their supervisor, because perhaps the issue, there's going to be an individual, everybody's responsible for their actions. And it doesn't mean that the leader is the cause of it. But if we started looking at this, we tried to take this holistic approach to it. And if we truly understood how impactful leadership is, I just think that we could get out in front of things a lot quicker and a lot more safely if we didn't just focus our flashlight, if you will, on the employee. Let's look at the organization. Let's look at their chain of command to see what role there may be in there. Because quite honestly, and you laid it out in the thing, toxic leadership has incredibly negative impact on the organization.
Yeah, you mentioned about getting out in front of stuff, and I guess the one thing I remind the public is that police officers are human beings. Mm-hmm. And, I think that somehow where along the line there's a myth in the public that they're going to operate like robots, right? And they're going to do everything perfect every time. I was just at IACP conference in Boston here a couple of weeks ago, and the commissioner of the Boston Police Department, brought it up, and he said, we're never going to get to zero mistakes. That we're being set up in some sense to fail, right? People are going to make mistakes, and we're under constant scrutiny or video. You're going to be able to find something wrong every single time that somebody's done something wrong. But you've got to remember that police officers are human beings, and they have bad days. They have aging parents that are dying at home that they're trying to take care of. They have money problems. They're trying to put their kids through college. They didn't sleep the night before, they're not feeling good, or they had an argument with their wife, and then they come into work and they have to go deal with somebody else who doesn't have coping skills, that is now dealing with the same things, ailing parents, domestic alcoholism, whatever. And they're trying to solve problems that they are having at their own lives. And so then it wears on their mental health. And so, again, we have to be leaders that are very, very hyper vigilant about our leadership styles, our employees. It's not an easy job, right? It's not an easy job to be a CEO, a positional authority position, and it's really not an easy job to be a leader. And you mentioned it at the start, it's action. It's action oriented, and it's not just a piece of paper that you can fill out. That's a manager.
I like this question here. You may not like it as much, but if you could go back to the very beginning of your career, and you could have, you're still a young guy, but if you could have a conversation with an even younger Darren Gault, right? If you could have that conversation, what would be the piece of leadership advice that you would try to give yourself that would make not only you more effective, but would make your leadership more effective? And because your leadership's more effective, your people are going to be better off. What would you tell that person?
Yeah, I would 20 years ago, I would pull myself aside and just simply tell me that this journey is a marathon and not a sprint.
I like that.
You are not going to learn everything from a podcast or a book or, a YouTube video. Whatever people are, doing now. We did stuff different, obviously reading or talking to somebody or a conference or something like that 20 years ago didn't have all these technical enhancements, but it's a journey, right? It's a marathon, and learn something from everybody. I don't want people on this podcast to be like, oh, we have to do everything just like this guy does, right? You should be learning from a variety of people and taking each one of their tools and putting it in your toolbox and building your toolbox and, education, experience, and then your own self-awareness of what you need to be better at. But if you're not evaluating those things over time, and they change over time, right? Again, it's a marathon. It's not a sprint. So if you're sprinting to the end line and then the race is over, and then you're like, dude, I'm, 5 years into this and I'm the best leader possible, then somebody on the marathon is going to continue to run circles around you, and you're going to be left behind.
Yeah, those videos of people that think they've won the race and they start celebrating before the finish line and people pass them up. Listen, and I'm not a runner, okay? but when you go and you look at marathon runners, only the very best are able to maintain a consistent pace throughout the entire race. Most of the people that are running, they'll have some parts that are, their pace is much faster and others where it's slower. And that's okay. The big deal is just to finish. And that's what we should be striving for.
Yeah, it's a marathon, not a sprint. I would just tell myself, slow down, learn, and don't worry about the sprint. It's hard to do. 20 years ago, I didn't know I was going to be the police chief. And this is my second agency. I came to the Moline Police Department and didn't grow up here as an officer. You don't know what you don't know, right? I had to use a cliche there, but everybody is very worried about the future, and you tend to miss things. And I think if I look back, I would have handled things differently. I would have handled things better, but that's also part of the growth process. And I think it's okay. You got to make mistakes as a young leader. I make mistakes every day, and it's okay. I'm gonna learn from that. I'm gonna grow from that. It's okay. It's okay to admit that you made a mistake and to grow from it. And I think your folks that you are leading want to know that you're willing to accept responsibility for an error. I've had projects that didn't go the way I wanted them to do, that they fell flat on their face. Okay, let's pull the plug on it. And I think sometimes people just plow ahead because they're so focused on the sprint, and that's where they get left behind.
I love that. And you brought up IACP, and one of the things that happened at IACP is kind of a big deal, Chief. You announced your candidacy for a vice president position with that organization. What's that all about? What prompted you to want to run for a leadership position in an organization of your peers?
Yeah, this was never on my radar. I had never planned this. I hadn't thought about it. In fact, when the candidates come around in previous years, I really thought that, I guess I doubted that I would even be relevant on that type of international stage. Back at our state conference early this year, I was approached by my colleagues in Illinois, and they asked me to consider running for IACP, which is the International Association of Chiefs of Police. And again, I just doubted my relevance. Did a lot of soul searching, did a lot of talking to people. Of course, number one, I had to talk to my wife at home, then kind of worked my way up and talked to my mayor and my city administrator, and everybody just kept telling me, you got to do it. You got to do it. We need you. And, I guess for me, I wanted to step up because I was asked, that people believed in me and believed that I was what we need in these challenging times. And I feel a sense of duty and honor to serve. And when I'm asked to consider and serve, usually I will do it. And so after 6 months and getting kind of my own local house in order with my city ended up passing a resolution saying that they supported me, and if I'm elected, that they would support me through 2030, which is a long time. It's a year campaign and 5 years on the executive board to when you become president at the final year. It's a big commitment. It's ultimately, this isn't about me, it's about the profession, right? And I'm really passionate about the leadership aspect of it, returning our profession to the nobility that it deserves. I'm willing to step up and serve. I'm willing to take on the challenge and arguably what I think is probably the most difficult era of modern law enforcement. We have to have unified and forward-thinking leadership, and I'm willing to work with our IACP members, 34,000 members in 170 countries around the world. And I think if we do that together, we can make a difference and make a change.
I'm going to be honest with you, Chief, as we're wrapping things up here, that I never really considered a whole lot about the leadership of IACP until I was blessed. And I do say blessed because that's how I feel to become friends with David Roush. And I look at how committed he is, not only to his own organization, but to that organization, and not just the organization as a whole, the way in which he handles members on an individual basis. And I keep seeing you guys stepping up to be a leader among leaders. And that's incredibly inspiring to me. So I wish you the best of luck, because I think it's an honorable profession, and that's an honorable organization.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you, and I really appreciate your kind words, and thanks for mentioning it. And I certainly got a long road ahead. I'll be traveling the country over the next year, meeting some different folks around the state associations in the country. So I look forward to having these conversations, and I think whatever happens, I know I will grow from it, and that I will learn from other people. And again, I would encourage everybody to do that, is take something away from these interactions, good or bad, and say, I want to learn from all these people and add it to my skill set.
That's awesome. So last question before we do our key takeaways here. I'm a big reader, and I love reading books on leadership, especially books written by great leaders. So what's your favorite leadership related book that you've read that you would recommend to everybody, to our listeners?
Yeah, it's a little dated. I liked Jack Welch, Straight from the Gut. I really like reading biographies, and this isn't a law enforcement leadership book, right? He was the CEO of GE, but some really, really good philosophies in there about integrity, people, culture, and teams. I really learned a lot from that. I'll give you a second one, Leadership on the Line, by Marty Linsky. Really good, big picture concepts on a leader. Like for example, get on the balcony, take a step back, look at it from the big picture view, and give the work back to your people. And so it's really good concepts. Those are some two good books that I've learned a lot from.
Those are going on the list right there to be read, because I like I said, I'm a big reader. But real quick, if I could just share with you my big takeaways from today, give you a chance to correct me if I was wrong. Takeaway number one is being a leader doesn't require positional authority, and I love that.
Yes.
All right. Next, and this one right here I thought was really good. In order for customer service, for lack of a better phrase, to work effectively, it has to be organization-wide, which was why you did the community policing. You got away with the positions, and you made it everybody's responsibility.
Has to be a culture.
Relationships are the key, no matter what position you're in.
Absolutely.
Oh, and buddy, I'm probably going to steal this. And by me telling you that means I'm not plagiarizing. Don't let them rob your social capital bank. Take control of that.
Absolutely.
And this is something I've been thinking about a lot. You talk about generational leadership. I think it's important for leaders to remember that it's often not a matter of right or wrong. It's just different.
We change. People change.
We should change, shouldn't we?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, here's the last thing I'll add to that is I remember when I started the police department, and, I wasn't in the military. I was college educated. And so my leaders were the baby boomers and traditionalists that were still left in the organization. And they hated the college educated, the people that were coming in, the Gen Xers and everything. Don't forget that you were new at one time and what your predecessors thought of you. And the generations change, and now you're leading a different generation. And if you don't learn, you're going to fail.
So to go along with that, the effectiveness of a leadership style is at the consent of those being led. They're the ones who make the decision on whether or not your style is effective or not.
Especially in today's workforce.
That's fantastic. Then the last thing, I kind of ad-libbed here for you based on what you said. Ideally, your leadership DNA should have more than just one or two strands. We should be seeking to learn from as many people as we possibly can and take what would work for us and make it part of our toolkit.
I'm going to steal that from you.
I think that when the way you started talking about it, I had this picture of this helix come in my head, and I'm like, the leadership DNA, it doesn't have to be simple. In fact, it shouldn't be simple. I mean, it should be complex because we're complex beings.
Yeah.
I love that. Well, Chief, I can't thank you enough for being with us today. It has been an absolute honor for us to talk with you. I'm going to ask you, and I'm going to do it while we're recording here, that as you go through this next year's journey, your campaign, please keep us in mind and keep us up to date. We'd like to help spread the word about where you're going to be and who you're talking to. And I'd love to hear what you learned too.
Yeah, it's great. I'll be in California in December 5th, and I'll be in New York the following week in December 12th and 13th. So we'll be all around, and love to hook up with anybody that listen to your podcast and have more conversations. And I'm sure I can learn something from everybody.
Well, at least you're starting with the small states. I'll give you that. Hey, but for our listeners, thank you so much for joining us today. And if you enjoyed the episode as much as I did, and I sure hope you did, be sure to follow the podcast on your favorite podcast provider. You can also find this episode and all our previous episodes on our website at commandpresence.net/podcast. Also, be sure to check us out on LinkedIn and YouTube. And as you go throughout the week, folks, please remember, be the leader you wish you had.